Dr. Narayan, may I request you to take your seat on stage, please? I would now like to invite Mr. Vikram Khanna, Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, and Professor Rajendra Srivatsava to join Dr. Narayan on stage for the question and answer session. I would now like to pass the floor to the chairperson, Mr. Vikram Khanna. Mr. Khanna, please.
Thank you, Rekha. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here among such distinguished panelists and in your company. It's your turn now. We've had three fascinating presentations, one by a hands-on, blow-by-blow account by Mr. Pillai. The first time I ever heard his story from beginning to end, but it's not ended yet, still a long way to go. And strategy, very astute strategy tips from Professor Srivastava and from Dr. Narayan, who, by the way, in case you do not know, he was the advisor to Prime Minister Vajpayee, an economic advisor to the Prime Minister. So he really knows what he's talking about. I was reminded after hearing all this, what some multinationals say about their experience of doing business in Indonesia, which is probably similar in some ways. And after a whole evening of complaining and, well, talking about their business and all that stuff, the conclusion was, the bottom line was, the only thing worse than the pain of being here is the pain of not being here. It probably works for India too. But I'm very glad that so much attention was focused on the whole issue of regulation and things like land acquisition and so on. Because one of the striking things is that despite a flurry of reforms since Chidambaram became Prime Minister, since Finance Minister, which was you make it 11. But since he became Finance Minister, there are a flurry of reforms, but they have not really led to created much traction, either in foreign direct investment or in the economy generally. Multi-brand retail was opened up last year. We don't have Tesco's and Safeways lining up. Nobody has shown any interest yet. 2 days ago, we have 100% foreign investment allowed in telecoms, norms liberalized in defense, norms liberalized in insurance. The stock market just shrugged. No difference. So it makes you think, it makes you wonder that perhaps actually the key really is not liberalizing foreign investment norms and raising investment limits. It's really about, it's about the issues you talked about. It's about the nitty-gritty of doing business. It's about regulation. It's about land acquisition. It's about policy uncertainty. It's about, whether the next government that comes will sort of reverse the multi-brand retail law, which is, who knows, some people think it's possible. Some of the issues you talked about. But I think Mr. Pillai gave a very interesting account of how he improvised. For example, on the land acquisition, where you put the onus on the seller to get everything cleared before you go in. I know of course, others who run other forms of creative improvisation. Mahindras, for example, have they allowed all the sellers of the land to have a stake in the final project. So that they made them stakeholders. They didn't just buy the land and say bye-bye. So there are various ways of doing this. So my question really is, do you feel, is it, I know the point Dr. Narayan raised is very valid, you need to change laws and so on, but meanwhile life has to go on. So are there ways, is there scope for business to improvise around a lot of the rigid regulations and so on? Is it possible to still do business and succeed?
I think the answer to it is that the opportunities are there, and you can keep blaming the circumstances and not making any moves. There will be investment that will take place. In my opinion, it's easier to do it in collaboration with a local partner. If I'm an Indian company, I do have an advantage of information, I do have an advantage of contacts, etc., over a party coming in. So if I am going to be negotiating what's my share of the deal, the foreign company, the foreign partner may be bringing in capital, they may be bringing in technology, but local knowledge, local distribution, these things are all also assets. These are competitive assets. And so if you look at Starbucks coming in and partnering with Tata's, Tata's will have some insights that Starbucks doesn't. So, for example, you take Starbucks in the US or Europe, you go in and it's brightly lit. All right, you got Wi-Fi, you got this, and you got that going on. If you go to the baristas in India, and you'll see them having dark corners and this and that. And there's a reason for it. And the reason is that in India, there isn't a traditional dating system where you go to a bar and we don't normally drink. So young college people going to college, they want to go in a coffee shop and do the dating there. So the Starbucks in India will have to take that into account, otherwise. So this is not going to come from the insights from the US. Okay, these are Indian insights that have to be factored in. But the opportunities are there, and what is short is capital. I've run into several managing directors who see growth opportunities. But when they start looking at local capital, the banks are interested in things like debt equity ratios. And what that means is, and the response from these MDs is, if I already had the money, if I already had so much in equity, I wouldn't need them. And so we need a different form of financing. We need forward-looking. And there's a fair bit of Indian money, if you will, that's actually in Singapore. And so we need to get some of that equity back, but there's a definite role of the government. I've talked to senior managers, and they have quit expanding with the interest rate around, for deposits being around 9%. Then when you're borrowing, very quickly it's up to 10–15%. And if you're looking at a sector, an industry where net margins are 12% optimistically, you can't afford to pay 15% for capital.
So I think that raises the issue of cost. I mean, a lot of companies actually tell you that it's amazing that India is cheap to do business. They tell you that one of the points some of you mentioned is the skills. I mean, India has a huge population, but hiring skilled workers is difficult and expensive, actually, if you really want very good people. The second cost you mentioned, the interest rates, very high. Third cost is infrastructure. Infrastructure doesn't work. Fourth cost is delays. There are delays. Real estate is expensive, in the cities at least. It's some cities are that expensive as Singapore even for expatriate. So you add it all up, and it's not a cheap proposition. I don't know what your experience is. You said you could do business there at less lower cost than you could do in Thailand, or would you really say India is reasonably priced?
The wastage factor in India can be high if you don't control it properly. But if you control it properly, generally the costs are low. Even taking into account certain degree of inefficiency, certain breakdowns, I mentioned that we have a chain of coal stores. Last year there was a huge blackout in the north, and I was really in a cold sweat because all our food stuff get damaged if we don't have power. But we had some foresight that we had in some bigger outlets 2 generators, others 1 generator. Now what this means is the cost goes up because you got to pay for the diesel. But it is still manageable. I feel that India, if there is a system, they will follow the system. And if the system is efficient, you can have an efficient situation, and generally the costs are lower. Of course, costs are going up. A young man trained in America with an MBA now probably ask for more than ₹1 crore of rupees and ask you what car. In the old days, they would even ask for a bullock cart, but now they are very demanding. So costs are going up. But I want to take your earlier question about improvisation. I think the Indians are the best for improvisation because they've got so many bottlenecks. they will know how to get around it. And this comes to Professor Srivastava's point. An Indian partner is essential, a good Indian partner. And that is a rare commodity. Because the partners tend to be the millstone around your neck if there's something goes wrong. In the old days, if you go into a partnership on a warehouse with one guy, and later you want to start something else, totally different, a motor car assembly, you have to get a no objection certificate from this guy, and he'll hold you by whatever, to extract maximum to make sure that he doesn't give you. So a partner is essential, but be very careful, judicious in getting the partner. We have a good partner. I've dealt with him for 25 years, so we stuck with him. And he's extremely useful. It's right. But I think the costs are still cheaper in India than elsewhere. The talent pool, again, there is a tremendous amount of talent available in India. It is true that skilled workers are in short supply and skilled training is still lacking. But these can be remedied, and I think efforts are being made. There's one coming up in Delhi in joint venture with Singapore. I think that will go a long way, because in the north there are not as many engineering colleges as around Tamil Nadu, around Chennai. So I think it will solve, these problems can be solved.
Narayan, would you like to add anything?
I think Mr. Pillai has put it very correctly. The only other facet that I would like to sing is India is a very cost-conscious society. And you just have to look at the automobiles and see what is automobile which is selling. And people are going in for fuel-efficient, cheap vehicles. So anything about 6 lakhs, 8 lakhs, let us say. So I just find that Mercedes, for example, first time in the world, they have introduced a 22 lakh rupees, how much is that? 2.2 million rupee vehicle in India, which shows that it is possible to make a Mercedes car at that particular price. And I'm sure that they'll have a good say. So I'm saying that yes, the input costs in terms of skill, etc., have to be managed in a manner that the output costs are still within the budget of the Indian. This is the trick that many successful companies have learned to do.
But there's some surprises. The Nano didn't take off despite being so cheap.
The Nano was a bad deal. You cannot make a car at a lakh of rupees. But if you look at the Maruti 800, the Maruti 800 started at 45,000 rupees. And even now, it's just about 2 to 3 lakhs. You can still get a car. So that was a bad engineering, that's a bad deal.
So your turn. Yes,
Well, let me just comment on the Nano. I think it was targeted too low. And this was my point, that even the Indians who are not well off have aspirations. They did not want to be sold something that was totally stripped of all comforts.
Ambassador.
Yes, I'm Si Changman from also ISAS. Until recently, I've served as an engineering director of a power company, Indian power company. My question addressed to Mr. Pillai. He has shared with us the success stories, the mistakes he's made, the problems he's confronted, land problem, bureaucratic delays, and change in laws. But these are the same problems faced by Indian companies in India. And India is a thriving private enterprise, from Tata, Reliance to Mahindra to small SME. How is it they can overcome these problems? Why is it so difficult for foreign investors? What is your answer?
I think Jackman, as usual, he knows India well, and he asked a very good question. You're absolutely right. This is where Vikram's question about improvisation. The Indians know how to go around most things. I mentioned to you earlier the young talent in India. In comparison with Singapore, let's take the banking sector. There are a lot of young people in Singapore, a lot of young in India. In Singapore, when you go to a banker, a young man, he will tell you the problems. He'll say, this is a problem you're going this is another problem you're going to face. It's very problem oriented. The Indian young man will tell you how to get around the problem because he lives with a problem all the time. And a market analysis person one day told me, the trouble with Singapore is, you have a problem, you run to the government. Singapore, in India, when you have a problem, you run away from the government. So they are very adept at this. And this is also the trouble for us, Chapman, and that is this, the Indian government official, sorry, he assumes you will find a way of doing this. So why are you making a fuss? I mean, look at all the Indians, they are doing it, so why can't you do it? But some of the things that a foreigner wants to do or has to do, it will be very difficult for him to do. That's why a good Indian partner may help. Because it is very dangerous for an outsider to come and do things that are done domestically. Give you a short story. A very senior civil servant, I won't mention his name because Dr. Narayan will know him. He came to Singapore and some friend, common friend in Delhi wrote to me and said, can you look after him? So I took him around, had dinner. He was very impressed with Singapore and so on. Later, when I went to Delhi, he hosted dinner for me, together with my friend Haida Sitawala, whom you know. And then he made a short speech. And he said, the one thing I learned from Mr. Pillai in Singapore was that in Singapore, it is possible to make money without being dishonest. So we were shocked. So, you see, the mindset in India are a little different. I'm not saying that they're dishonest, but it's just that they will know a way of getting around multitude of regulations. Which
how do you do the same thing as they are?
it is difficult. It is not that easy. Even if you know how it is done, that when you're there 20 years, you know. But it is not very advisable, you know. Because nothing that if you sail too close to the wind and somebody notices it, even if he doesn't use it then, he can use it some other time. So you've got to be a little careful with these things. But you're right, they get around it. India has grown, as Dr. Narayan said, 6-7%, they will grow, in spite of all the problems. But there are no problems whether they grow. I'm not sure.
Well,
Sorry.
if the problems weren't there, it would grow at 10%. The flip side of that is that some of the Indian companies that have gone outside of India, they encounter a situation where they don't run into these barriers that they used to going around. So outside of India, they can go run a lot faster.
No, this is not right. I'm sorry. Indian companies who have gone overseas have not necessarily performed better than locally. They have actually done fairly badly in the last 15-20 years. So they have not yet gone to the level of confidence or capability of performing in a global environment.
Well, it really depends on the sector. And so, I mean,
IT is done all right.
well, IT has been running on a cost model, but they're now trying to go up the value ladder. But you know, there are Indian companies. You know, you take Mahindra, they're doing quite well in the US, and so once they get to know the system, they actually start expanding because they don't encounter the barriers.
Complicated. Yes, sir.
A comment and a question, if I may. I think a comment on the previous debate can certainly be amplified if you look at the Indian managers and their success outside of India, if you know it was the success of Indian companies could be debated. But I actually had a question, particularly for Dr. Narayan and any of the other panelists, if they care to comment. One of the implicit underlying assumptions in the discussion we've had so far is that the Indian market, despite its challenges, is an attractive one worth still striving for. Could I perhaps seek a contrarian view along the lines that it's probably only a 20-year-old phenomenon that we somehow found the Indian market very attractive based on a premise of a demographic dividend and the promise of liberalization in the mid-90s under Dr. Manmohan Singh. Do you see any prospects of or any downside risks of the demographic dividend not paying off? Do you see any possibilities of that market being not as attractive versus Indonesia or Turkey or other emerging markets? If so, what would be some of the key risk milestones, or what would be some of the potential solutions to avoid such a disaster scenario?
I think you're right that the market has grown significantly in the last 20 years. Now, I'll come at it from a fiscal angle. That 12 years back we had a government budget of 2 lakh crores, actually, crores. Now we have a government budget of close to 10 lakhs, 9 to 10 lakh crores. Now a 5% multiplier in even nominal terms of government spending in the last 10 years, and that reflects the stage of the growth of the economy. It can't be seized, and it can't be just because I mean, if you actually take the numbers, about 20 million people, 20 million kids write the class 10 exam every year, and maybe not half of them get the jobs. So that's half of them. We call it a demographic dividend. I would say there's a demographic burden. There are 10 million people floating around without any particular jobs. But consumption, demands, housing, anything that you cars, everything is growing. So I think really, I mean, in economic terms, we are somewhere across the Lafayette curve. We are already on the way up. We are at a position where the growth will come automatically with sui generis. The biggest example out of this is food. In fact, the share of cereals in the food basket has dropped significantly. I'll just tell you one number. Up to, I'm not particularly fond of the policies of this particular government, but up to 2004, the drop in poverty, annual drop in poverty, was measured at around 0.7% a year. In the last 7 years, it's been falling at the rate of close to 1.8 to 2%. This means actually the well-being of the individuals, even at the bottom of the ladder, is definitely improving. The consumption today, the food price inflation has nothing to do with rice and wheat. It is because people are eating more food, more fruits, more vegetables, more eggs, more chicken, whatever. So I do see that the snowball has started getting bigger.
One thing that has been mentioned in the context of the demographic dividend, perhaps not working out, is education. I mean, if you're not able to educate the growing numbers, the growing millions come out, the demographic dividend could become a demographic curse. That has been mentioned by a number of people. I'm not sure how that is going to play out, but it is a possibility. More questions? I've got plenty of questions, but yeah.
This question is addressed to Professor Narayan. You made an interesting comment about the strategy that Daimler is adopting regarding the launch of the trucks. One of the things that I understand is that they have decided that they would not have as large a repair and spare part network, obviously also being a new entrant compared to the other two, that is the Tatas and the Leylands. What I heard is that they would probably improve the specs and make the vehicle more long-lasting. That's the public announcement that I heard. Do you think, doesn't that sound counterintuitive given the road conditions that we all know about and discussed? And do you think it's going to be a future way, or is that they're going to face big challenge?
I don't think, forgive me, because I was looking at that model very carefully. I don't think they are the first here. It was actually the Japanese car makers in India, Honda and Toyota, who came up and says you don't have to open the bonnet until 100,000 kilometers. Okay, that may be a tall promise. You don't have to open the bonnet until 50,000 kilometers, and that's the Indian condition. And where we are used to ambassadors and Fiats, where you open the bonnet every morning to see whether the engine is still running. So we've come a very, very long way. So if Daimler is saying that I am going to bring in specs in India, where I don't require so many maintenance stations, I'm willing to believe them. I'm willing to believe them. Maybe they'll have a compromise a little later on. But actually their model is also, the reason for this is a little different, because they have decided that India is going to be their hub for exporting, particularly to Africa and South America, etc. That's the reason why they may not want to increase their total internal production. I don't think it's going to exceed 100,000.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, actually this is a question for Mr. Pillai. You mentioned about the power cut last year in India, where 650 million people without power. The last time that happened in the US, in Ohio, I mean, there was really a huge implication. Now, what happened to the stock market the day after was, I had to give an interview and I had to say that look at the reaction of the Indian people, whether they are taking this seriously or not. I mean, of course, it recovered within 24 hours. But the reaction was not there. If you didn't know there was a power cut, you will not be able to see it from the stock market. So going back to this point of the level of, I think, positiveness or optimism of the Indian people, what do you feel about that having a effect on the growth in India? Because it seems like that many of people in India, looking inside in the conditions, they are completely comfortable with what is going on.
The happiness index of India may not be as high as Bhutan, but it's still very high. And people have wondered, with almost 30% of the people being below poverty line, they still have a very positive attitude. This is one of the great things about the country. In that, when, let's say there's something on the street, slightest excuse, there's a dance, there's a, music, and people are very free to do this. So the positive attitude is something that sometimes it goes overboard because the seriousness of a matter is not really considered. Like you said about stock market, they treat it as two different things. Wow, after all this, the blackouts happen every now and then. Oh, what's new? It'll get sorted out. That feeling that something will be done, sorted, is always there. But it's not always a good thing. Because I think if a country wants to really grow, it has to take its problems seriously and address them. Dr. Narayan mentioned what is being done in various areas. My experience is India is very poor in execution. I'm sorry to say, this is the feeling I have, that they do, because this also hoga, there's something else that also can be done, It's never something that I need this standard, I will achieve this standard. Very few companies. The companies like Mahindra that Professor mentioned, they have this. There are probably 24 companies which have very strict rules for good corporate governance, good standards that they maintain. But majority are not. There are, fortunately now there are indicators that are published, corporates with governance and sort of thing. And even though we are a small company, we are always featured in that list as being one of those followed. But generally this is not the case. So the positiveness is good, but sometimes a little counterproductive because they don't take things as seriously as they should.
On the stock market, by the way, we've often reported, it has often happened that the day the government has fallen, the market has risen. That has surprised a lot of our reporters here. We said, how can this be? It seems all right.
There's always hope.
It may be an improvement. It may be, it can happen. More questions? I have plenty of questions, but your turn. 15, sorry. Next.
It's a question addressed to Dr. Narayan. You spoke of the attractiveness of the, say, pharmaceutical sector. Now, but you haven't spoken of, say, multilateral intellectual property regulations and other kinds of regulations. They may act as a constraint to the growth of this kind of sectors in the Indian economy. Does it? Because India doesn't have the windows like compulsory licensing, etc. So, do intellectual property regulations act as a constraint on these sectors?
As Professor Chaudhary is aware, India did not have product patents until 2005, which means that this kind of copying the chemicals was going on for 35 years. So it has a very, very strong national pharmaceutical industry. Now, with a lot of products of common use going off patent, the world is realizing that they have to have a source for generic drugs, including the United States. And therefore, the opportunities for Indian pharmaceutical industries to export those off-patent drugs back to the United States increases. And you can increasingly see, I mean, as an ex-WTO hand, you can increasingly see that even the US and EU are not taking a strong stance on property rights for pharmaceuticals. They are technically going into national level disputes, one on quality and two on the technical infringement of the patent when it was active, not on the conversion to generics. So I think you see a very, very different nature of development happening in the pharmaceutical industry.
Is a lady? Yes.
Good evening. I'm Vasudha Sarawati from SMU. My question is directed to both Mr. Pillai and Narayan. You spoke about how the automobile industry as well as the petrochemical industrialized housing have a great future ahead in India. However, all these three industries require like a lot of land. And given the problems that we have right now with the Land Act and all the issues, including the one in West Bengal, especially today since ArcelorMittal has pulled out of India, do you think these industries still have a very viable future ahead? Or do you think there's going to be a change seeing that land has become a major problem and not just a minor one that you can overcome pretty easily?
First on the question of land, I think Dr. Narayan talked about the Land Acquisition Act. My concern is not so much of land that we get from government. State development corporations have land, and when you buy that land, you are assured certain basic infrastructure, including power connection, which is something very important. My problem is with private land, where you buy land in the market. And that is major exercise because multiple ownership, different tier families. And in one case, a piece of land that I bought very, very hesitantly. We had agreed on the price and everything. Then I found, it had 12 owners. Then I found that one of the owners had actually been to a mental asylum. So I wanted to abort the deal because what I was worried was some other member of the family will use this as an excuse to try and, you've already paid the deposit, you abort the deal, you collect the money, you don't give it back. Because on the grounds that there was one mentally disabled person and you exploited him, and therefore this deal is not true. So I said, no, we are not going to pay deposit, we are not going to, because you have this problem. But the whole 12 fellows turned up with their families and were so much, such a pleading sort of situation. Finally, hard-nosed as I am, I had to relent and say, yes, we'll buy. And God's grace, so far, no problem. But these are all little problems in India, and they can spin out of control. So you're going to be extremely careful where you buy the land. And I'm not as optimistic as Dr. Narayan. What he said about the housing, I can vouch for it that it is true, particularly in certain parts of India, because there's a tremendous demand. If you go to a state like Kerala, where nobody works, but they have plenty of money because of the remittance economy, the amount of money that comes in from the states It all goes into housing. They build grand houses like as if they are in the Middle East with high walls, you know, and then leave it to rot. But that's happening. So the housing industry in Kerala is very, very active. So is the car. They sell the most number of BMWs in Cochin compared to any other city. This is all, you know, remittance money, but that happens. There is money in the country, and a lot of it is being channeled to housing. So I agree with you. But land to me is a very, very difficult piece of, you know, a difficult problem that needs a lot of attention. And this is where an Indian partner is extremely useful, because he will know how to navigate the choppy waters.
I'd like to add a couple of points. In addition to an Indian partner, you really need a good law firm. And when you deal with Indian entities, they rely very heavily on the chartered accountants as well. So you really need a team. You need the lawyer and you need the chartered accountant, because the Indian partners are not going to move without the chartered accountants saying something.
They're both very creative in India.
Yeah, in some countries we keep two books, one book for the government, for taxes, another book so we have some proper measures that accountants don't track, like intellectual property and so on. And in India we keep a third book, which is for ourselves, not to be disclosed. So one comment I really wanted to make was that we need a team, chartered accountants, so on coming. And the second thing is that demand is going to go up, even if the growth is 5%, even if it's 4%, it's going to grow. And the reason is that the growth is distributed unequally. Okay, so if let's say when India was growing at 8%, it wasn't an average 8% across the population. It was more skewed towards the upper end. So the middle class was growing at 16%, if you will. And when we had 8% growth in India, consumer packaged goods were growing at 25%. And so with the growth with the continued growth of the middle class, there is going to be an increasing demand for it. There'll be smaller flats or whatever it is, but the demand is going to be there on personal housing. And I didn't mean to hijack it, so.
That's fine.
I just wanted to clarify one point, one comment that was made just now. ArcelorMittal has not said that they are withdrawing from India. They are only pulling back from the Odisha plant, and they are staying on with the Jharkhand and Karnataka plants. So I think the thing will be misunderstood otherwise.
POSCO is
Karnataka.
the 2 billion project.
And they're still in Odisha.
Odisha.
I think we have time for just a couple more questions.
Hello, good evening. Good evening to everybody. Looking at the discussion what we had today, I understand that yes, there is a big potential. Still, the Indian economy and the market are a bit lucrative for people to invest into Indian markets and economy. But considering the uncertainties, what we have also discussed today, be it the political instability, where maybe even if I am entering into the Indian market today, knowing the political or the policies what are there today, but considering the political instability, we don't know this. Every government is different every time, and then they will change the policies. So considering all these instabilities, we have not even discussed about, or rather, we have not seen the Indian income tax structure, the rate, the tax rate what is being presently applied and everything. Are we not losing out that margin where we can really compete with other emerging markets? We are powerful, means India as an economy is a powerful economy, but are we still not losing out on that things because of all this instability? And as an investor, what is the kind of confidence they would see for, and also considering the kind of exit barrier what we just discussed today, is because everybody who is investing in India, they will be seeing all these things. So are we not losing out on that benefit?
I think, let me kind of rephrase what all three of us have said, and perhaps that will give you your answer. I don't think any of us said that there are no problems. There are problems, there are serious problems. Regulation, governance problem, implementation problems, those problems exist. And in fact, from all the examples that you made, we try to bring out what are the kind of problems that you face in India. At the same time, is it a worthwhile place to invest in? I think all of us feel that there are huge opportunities there for investment, for growth, as well as for making money. That is there. Finally, then the ball is in the hands of the entrepreneur. It's for you to weigh the risks and rewards, to weigh the opportunities and the difficulties, and to take a call whether you're going to go to India or whether you're going to go to South Africa or any other country. I mean, the person who's holding the capital will have to decide. I think the summary of this is that India can help you make money. I think nobody who has invested has walked out of India saying, I have lost huge money there. No. Who has completed a business, everybody has made money, maybe has walked out. I mean, nobody is a big word. I would say a majority of the people would have made money and walked out. So, I think they're just putting the picture before you. The risk-reward option is yours.
I'd like to just end with on a positive note. I'm thinking of some possible game changers for India in the years ahead. One of them I can see is shale oil. It's going to lead to lower oil prices. I don't think you're going to have $100 plus oil prices for a long period ever again after shale comes on.
Are you selling short?
I would. The other thing is the Aadhaar program, which is the rural empowerment, where I think you have like 300 million bank accounts being opened by people for the first time. Is going to lead to a massive increase in financial inclusion over the next 2 or 3 years. And that is something huge. That is something huge that perhaps not enough attention has been focused on that. And that is going to present huge opportunities. By the way, we have not talked about rural India very much at all. And I think that's going to be a big part of the story. One can think of other things. There's the Delhi-Mumbai corridor, which, if it works out as planned, could also be a game changer, or so we are told. Dr. Narayan mentioned several industries, petrochemicals, refining, and so on. So I just like your comments on these 4 possible game changers. Just a quick comment each, if possible. The shale oil, the energy revolution. By the one more is the collapse of the gold price, which I think is the best news for India.
Indian housewife.
Anyway, so any comments on these potential possible game changers?
Well, I'll take the easy one, which is oil. And most of our deficit, the large portion of our deficit is driven by oil prices, which then restricts capital available for other things. So that's definitely, that's a no-brainer. If it goes in that direction. Although I'm not sure whether how long shale is going to persist.
I have to disappoint Chen, because when you say game changer, it means a complete change, something that brings about significant change. My experience in India is rather short, about 20 years. So I may be wrong, but India, I don't think there can be a game changer. It's the nature of things. Things will evolve, and eventually you'll get there. But it's not going to be like, say, the shale oil or the other things that rural. It is true that if you can, the Aadhaar thing, Nilakani is able to do it, it will achieve. But the execution is a problem. And my confidence in the execution level, I'm afraid, is not very high. So there will be changes, gradual changes, there will be improvement, and Dr. Narayan mentioned this, how things have improved. I have seen in the 20 years, tremendous improvement. The airports, the roads, you know, the hotels. I mentioned about this guy at the traffic light changing to 80%, as he said, you know. But the moment he goes to the hotel, if he goes to an Oberoi or a Tata or a Meridian or higher, he'll change his mind because it is as good as any, the service is even better. So things have improved, but it is at a glacial pace. It is never a game changer in the sense that, wow, tomorrow there is a casino and things are different. You know. That can never happen in India. That's my feeling. Sorry.
But telecoms has been a game changer.
Yes, it has.
Mobile telecoms has changed the game for a lot of people. But,
Yeah.
but so it was, there can be, maybe not as big as, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe not a huge game changer, but significant improvement, I think is
Yeah, actually Vikram, I mean, the particular one that you mentioned about Aadhaar is very relevant because I cannot imagine that having been in government, I cannot imagine 15 years ago that we would have had the courage to take on such a big IT architecture of the Aadhaar program, which would deliver seamlessly money to the people's bank accounts. I mean, it's a huge complex, but yes, to that extent, I would not say telephone, I would say really IT knowledge, IT in governance is becoming a game changer. Because you see all sorts of, you see land records, you see sales tax records. The GST, when it comes in, has to be totally IT architectured. So I think that is the kind of tech, I would say, information technology will be a game changer for India.
Well, thank you. I think I managed to end on at least a halfway positive note. But we must thank our panelists for a wonderful, stimulating discussion. Thank you all.